Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and sea to the far corners of the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God.
As one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million. Planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
I've seen him kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazi.
Those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed. The bitterness of men fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell is a very interesting place. There are a lot of people who would like to know what's going on. There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome, everyone, into Garden of Doom. And this week we're getting back into the world of voodoo. Our guest this week is Sallie Ann Glassman. She studied ceremonial magic, voodoo, and yoga most of her life. She has been practicing voodoo in New Orleans since 1977 and was ordained as a Manbo, a Vodou Priestess, in November 1995 in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. She is the owner of the Island of Salvation Botanica and founder of La Source Ancienne, I hope I'm pronouncing it closely, Onfu, where she presides over weekly voodoo ceremonies, including one later today. Today's Easter. Happy Easter to everyone who celebrates. She has led her community in numerous public ceremonies. Miss Glassman is an artist who exhibits her paintings and assemblage art pieces at several New Orleans galleries. She illustrated the Enochian Tarot and was co-creator and illustrator of the New Orleans Voodoo Tarot. We really need to talk about the Enochian Tarot. If I forget, please remind me before we go off the air. Because
you forget the Enochian Tarot.
My ability to forget things is unbridled. But thank you so much for coming to the show. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. I'm fine. It's actually a chilly day in New Orleans for Easter, so I'm happy to be at home on the phone with you.
Terrific. Well, thank you for that, especially on Easter. And I know that you're having a ceremony later on this afternoon. So you wrote a book called Vodou Visions, and I want to spell how you spell voodoo because you actually go into some lovely detail as to why you use the English wording and letters the way you did. It's Vodou. Visions is visions. But a lot of the book has things spelled differently than one might assume. And there's a reason for it, but you'll have to read the book if you want to find out what that is. But I actually found that to be really, really interesting. And I don't know, it just had a stamp of authenticity to it. So I think your origin story in and of itself is really, really interesting. We chatted a long time ago, like several months ago, and it took a bit to get on the air. But so the audience obviously doesn't have the benefit of, what you told me. So I would love for you to sort of tell your origin story.
So I'm second generation Ukrainian American Jewish from Maine. And I certainly went on a long journey to become a Manbo Asogwe, a priestess of Vodou, in 76, I believe. I was living in my cousin's unheated barn in Kennebunkport, Maine, and it was 20 degrees October 1st, and I'm thinking I better figure out someplace to go. And my brother called saying that he had gotten a job teaching at Tulane University in New Orleans. And something in my head just said, Vodou and jazz might be really interesting. So I packed up my sheepdog and my parakeet and flew down to New Orleans. And indeed, Vodou and jazz were very interesting, as is the city and the people who inhabit New Orleans, and the entire environment is fascinating and beautiful and weird and otherworldly. And I ended up staying. I think my second day in New Orleans, I ran into a guy who called himself Andre the Martinican. I was convinced he was from another planet. He was the single most psychic human being I have ever met, and unnervingly so. He could read minds, and I was always thinking something strange about him because he was so unusual. And he had very long articulated fingers, and the baby finger kind of curved off the sides of his hands, and so I was convinced he was a Martian or somewhere from outer space.
Right.
He would call me, having never been in my home, and describe the contents of my home to me in the most offhanded, casual way. It was just freaky. I was a bartender at the time, and he would sit at the bar and start reading people. And instead of protesting that this total stranger had any right to be saying anything to them, let alone talking about their deepest, darkest secrets, and instead people would just defend themselves and say why they were the way he was describing. At any rate, he worked at the Vodou Museum in the French Quarter of New Orleans. He made me promise that if I would never work at the museum and never work for the people at the museum, that he would take me under his wing and teach me a thing or two. And so I made that promise, and I never worked there, although for many years afterwards, the Vodou Museum insisted that I got my start working for them. I never did work for them. And he taught me a great deal about observing humanity, observing closely and picking up on people's vibes. I had been pretty psychic since I was a child. And my first memories of personal thought, are that the world didn't look very solid to me. It looked like a mirror reflection on the surface of an ocean of energy, and still looks that way to me. But I didn't know that anything was odd about that until I was much older and realized that people didn't know what I was talking about half the time. But I noticed as a child that adults were a little taken aback by me, and that I knew more about them than they were willing to say. I can remember walking through my parents' party that they were having, and my mood was going all over the map. And I started to wonder where that mood swing was coming from, and realized it was coming from the adults at the party, that I was picking up on other people's emotions. And I realized how invasive that was, both for me and for them. So at that point, I think I was 13, and I started drawing my own first tarot deck because I wanted a way to have a switch where I could turn this off and on. And by the time I met Andre the Martinican, I had developed those skills pretty well. I mean, I was doing tarot readings for people all the time, and crystal ball readings for people. But he helped me hone those techniques. At the point where I was, I think it was 1995, and I had been in New Orleans for some time at that point, And I met a woman who lived in my neighborhood named Tina Gerard, who was a phenomenal artist and performance artist and crazy woman. And she was the president of a temple in Haiti that year and invited me to come and witness a ceremony one November. While I was sitting in her kitchen discussing the possibility, the phone rang. And it was a gentleman named Edgar Jean-Louis, who was later to become my initiator in Haiti and my papa and my mentor and friend, very good friend. And he had spoken with the Loa, the spirits of Vodou, and they had told him that I should just come down and initiate and not simply attend the ceremony. And not knowing any better, I said, okay, and flew to Haiti and met Edgar. I can remember driving in my friend's sports car to pick Edgar up on the way to the initiation. And it was a very small little sports car. I was sitting in the back seat. Edgar was close to 7 feet tall, very thin. And as I'm sitting there driving through the Bel Air neighborhood, which is one of the most impoverished slums in the Western Hemisphere, I was literally trying to figure out what was building and what was rubble in the street. Yeah. And this incredibly tall, dark, impressive man folded himself down into the seat next to me. And I took one look at him and I knew my life was going to be different and that this person would never be out of my mind ever again. And he has never been out of my mind. He changed my life and set me down a very different path than the one I was on. And we were very close. He would come to New Orleans and lead ceremonies and teach my group here. And I would bring people there and stay in his temple and do ceremonies with him and learn from him. It was a true blessing because he was a magnificent old man. He was a wonderful person.
Now, it sounds like it's probably pretty unusual for a second-generation Ukrainian Jewish, at this point, young woman from Maine to make their way to New Orleans, period, then to make their way to Haiti to become an initiate in, probably where people think the voodoo originated. Now, listeners of the show know that voodoo comes from a bunch of places, but notably West Africa, and then they're sort of combined with the local Native American, First Nations, indigenous populations, and then Catholicism sort of, put its stamp on it. Or I think actually more to the point, voodoo sort of adapted and accepted some of the stamps of Catholicism, and they sort of did the opposite of what usually, like someone who comes in and conquers, they sort of put their god heads on someone else's god heads. I think voodoo did the jujitsu version of sort of saying, we'll call it this, but it's still ours. And I guess whoever was in charge.
So it influenced Catholicism in the areas where voodoo flourished. In New Orleans, people have home altars. Catholic people have home altars. There's all kinds of ways in which the saints are supplicated in the same way that a Loa, a Vodou spirit, might be supplicated. They have prayers, Saint Anne, bring me a man. People here, when they're trying to sell property, will bury Saint Anthony halfway upside down in the yard to sell homes. I have a shop, the Island of Salvation Botanica. I cannot keep statues of Saint Anthony in Saint Joseph. Saint Joseph in stock because people are always trying to sell their properties. So I think the influence went both ways. But certainly Catholic saints were recognized as being symbolic, let's say, of spirits that were brought over from Africa on the backs of enslaved people. So St. Patrick is shown driving snakes out of Ireland and became associated with Dambala Wedo, who is a serpent. So it's not exactly that St. Patrick is being honored, but the recognition is of Damballa, who is somehow encoded within that image.
Right. It's almost like the reverse avatar, that the avatar has been usurped by the actual underlying faith. But I just think that's really cool. I don't know that hasn't been done anywhere else, but it's not been so obvious to me before, which is interesting. You spent a lot of time talking about how Qabbalah influenced you and how Qabbalah and yoga and the chakras and these things are incorporated into voodoo. And I don't know that I ever heard that before, or maybe I just wasn't listening, which is entirely possible, or hearing what was being told to me. But can you talk a little bit about, first of all, where did you study Qabbalah? Because it's not that easy to do, at least not properly. We all know about sort of like, Badanda said she studied Qabbalah, but it was, sort of like, the Main Street version of Qabbalah, and yoga and the chakras, and you could take them in order or mix them together, because you're the expert in this. So if you could sort of put those things together and describe, I guess, the precepts of both and how they fit into voodoo, or why anyone should be surprised if they do.
So I'm just reading a book right now that has this full of information that I was unaware of, that in Africa, there is a confluence, a synchronization with Hindu deities from chromolithograph images. The prints of the Hindu deities are used throughout altars and are honored as being forms of Mamiwata. And same kind of phenomenon that went on with the Catholic chromolithographs in Haiti. I just found that absolutely fascinating. When I was in Haiti, I would see little statues of Ganesh, for instance, the elephant deity, who's about opportunities and opening doors and pathways. And he would be on an altar next to an image of Legba, who is the gatekeeper and the opener of the way and the opener of opportunities in Vodou. And so clearly the creator of that altar recognized the similarity of frequency, if you will, or power, or principle within those two different pantheons. You might see Erzuli Freda, the spirit of love and beauty and the dream of perfection, on an altar with an image of Lakshmi, who is, abundance and one of the Hindu goddesses, who's all about luxury and beauty and all of that, and sweetness.
Yeah.
So
be a little bit like Aphrodite.
Yeah. So there is a kind of natural Qabbalah. So much of Qabbalah has to do with a kind of index file of all the possibilities of the universe, and it's described as being a way to catalog the way in which God dreams, the divine dreams us into being. And so there's a natural aspect to that I see enacted in Vodou. There's something so absolutely natural about Vodou practice all the time. And so that is a way in which we as humans can recognize maybe the meaning behind a symbol. It's one thing to learn a catechism or a doctrine about Legba. It's another thing to understand it deeply enough and intimately enough in your blood and bones that you recognize that that's Legba. That's the same principle in Ganesh. There's the influence of numbers, which is really important in Qabbalah, and because the Hebrew alphabet, each letter is a number, has a numerical value, and so there's formulas that you can create and recognize in the world, and you can recognize similarities between seemingly very different words, different ideas, and you can find the core essence of that. For me, Qabbalah is like Vodou, a living practice. It's a way of decoding what is in highly symbolic forms in our everyday mundane lives in the world around us, and finding out the essential meaning of it. And so that's how I apply that to.
We have a little bit of synchronicity here because I started reading a book of a future guest, and I really don't usually do that. I usually finish the book of the guest, and I don't want to clutter things in my head, that I may conflate. But I think that maybe there was something to it because this book, just by coincidence, was by a Kabbalistic rabbi who's also a prison chaplain, which is going to be an interesting story unto itself. But the book is biblical fiction. He says it's right on the back. It's biblical fiction. But, I think he's trying to take some concepts. Why am I telling you and the audience this? Is because they spend some time with, characters basically having distilling large concepts into, he's got a great economy of language, which obviously I don't, but basically that the numbers equal math, and math turns into the music of the universe, which is when you were telling me your description of how you saw the earth sort of as, almost like a watery, blurry sort of sphere of energy, that's vibrational, that's resonance, that's the music. And that's sort of what, as soon as you said it, I'm like, oh my God, I just read this morning. And I've seen it in other places too, of course, but probably not as well as this one gentleman put it. And I'm wondering if that is sort of what you were saying as well.
Absolutely. And there's also a history of the presence of Qabbalah in Vodou, that there were Masons practicing both in Haiti. I don't know if you can hear this snoring, but that's my dog in the background. She's very interested in this subject. There were the presence of Masons in both Saint-Domingue, Haiti, and the Louisiana colony, and they brought with them various forms of mysticism, including Kabbalism, which is the Jewish mysticism. And there's also a history of very negative PR for both traditions, that the Spanish Inquisition used the very same horrific images that were used against the Jews and applied them to Afro-Caribbeans. And, so they're satanic, they are against God, they sacrifice babies and eat them, they have depraved orgies, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a sense in Haitian Vodou.
Do you believe that?
It still works. They're powerful images. They're hard to get out of your head once somebody's planted them.
I mean, you think that anyone has any education is like it's bad guy playbook number one is to say the other side is satanic eating babies. Where are the babies? I mean, where are their parents?
At any rate, there's a recognition of maybe some kind of fraternal experience here, that both traditions have experienced this vilification, and so there is some recognition of one another. And the word Qabbalah, I've heard people saying in Haiti, and Haitian priests and priestesses refer to Qabbalah, and they know what they're talking about. So this isn't just a creation of my own.
Oh, I don't doubt it for a second. It was interesting because I'm glad you mentioned the Masons, because you mentioned the Templars, which later resurfaced, as the Masons, and put that in there. I had never put the two together, but now it makes perfect sense. And the Gnostics, and the Gnostics means a lot of things, but it also means one thing, and the whole thing is very confusing. And the funny thing is, one of the people who set me down this course is a Gnostic priest. I never actually had the conversation with him as to what exactly is Gnosticism. Of course, I since learned there's not one thing there either. But I don't know how much if the voodoo would be more like the Ascend version, or the Enochian, or the Sethian, or it's not even clear. But
Well, to further complicate things, there's no written canon for Vodou, and there's no central church. So everything was passed by word of mouth, and one teacher would lead their own particular community. And so everybody has a sort of different take, and even fairly different practices. There's an order to how a ceremony is conducted, but within that order, there is a lot of leeway for interpretation and improvisation and spontaneous creativity.
One size doesn't fit all. You actually defined voodoo in any spell. You said it means those who serve the spirits, which I thought was a very elegant. I've never heard that either. No, it's just a term that people loosely apply, and there's been, luckily enough, on the show we've had other folks dispel some of the negative connotations that come with it, and that doesn't mean you don't have to either. But if you don't want to, you don't have to, or at least the most necessary ones. But I think it is sort of necessary to, right out of the box, sort of address the associations. And you start with, in your chapter, what is voodoo, with black magic, sorcery, and devil worship, the stuff the movies are made of. And I think it would be terribly unfair to have a Manbo high priestess not be able to say, address that.
Yeah. So part of me is very reluctant to apologize for things that Vodou isn't, and to even address them at all, because it's so absurd. But, paramount is that it's a satanic evil practice, and there's nothing satanic or evil about it. It's a life-affirming religion and philosophy and way of life. It's a beautiful song and dance. It's a way of reaching into the soul of life and extracting the meaning in spite of whatever might be going on the surface level. When I think about Vodou's early ancestors who were taken from their homes in Africa and from their families and communities, and everything was just taken from them, their dignity and their lives were very much shortened, and they suffered.
After a little bit, you don't know where you're from.
And their ancestors were taken from them. And Vodou emerged as this extraordinarily resilient, positive, life-affirming healing practice that reestablished connection to ancestors, reestablished a connection to an invisible world that's full of life and power and meaning, and had the miraculous effect of taking people out of the catastrophic circumstances that they found themselves in, and took them from slavery to freedom and disempowerment to empowerment, made ordinary people the vessels for extraordinary spirits. It's phenomenal. And I believe that in our time, even if we're not enslaved as chattel slaves, doing manual labor and being whipped to death and worked to death, we still have some concept of what slavery is like. And we might be enslaved to a bad relationship, or enslaved to our habits and self-destructive things that we do to ourselves, and the list goes on and on. And when we think about how difficult it is to take off the shackles that we've put on ourselves, I am just amazed and deeply impressed by these people who held on to their beliefs and their sense of self and their sense of value in the world, and developed this technology for reaching beyond the visible surface of things into the core of what matters to them, and were able to bring through this invisible power. Of course, that was terrifying to the slave owners and threatening to their intentions And so this effort was made to vilify Vodou and to say that it was evil, when in fact, of course, it was the slave trade that was evil. You don't do that to people.
Of course. We say, of course, now. I mean, it's happening in some parts of the world right now. Not as obviously, not to the extent, clearly. At least I hope not. I think that we never actually got to the original. Like, how unusual is it for someone of your background to become a priestess in Haitian voodoo?
It's becoming less unusual, but at the time it was pretty unusual. I knew of a couple of people who had done that. What was amazing to me was how readily accepted I was by the community in Haiti and how welcoming and open they were to me. Although it took many, many years to really gain trust and become part of the family and have people express that to me. It was a very welcome transformation that happened, but it took a lot of work. And I think that the Haitian people are very used to being effed over and have people promise them the world and just be taken, whatever few resources are left there from them. So It was a real honor. Those doors opened up for me. I didn't ever question them, but looking back on it, it just felt completely natural, just putting one foot in front of the other. As something became available, I just went through that door. Looking back on it now, it is pretty unusual and quite a blessing in my life.
It's one thing that was made clear to me in your book. Again, I'm not sure if it's something that I missed in prior conversations with other folks or whatnot, and that's probably the most likely suspect. But voodoo is really not pagan. There is a one God above the others. It's just that you can't really put a name or face on it. Well, that sounds familiar. That's nothing new. And that the Loas, the spirits, they're not exactly the same as angels or demons. It seems like they're more akin to the jinn or almost fae folk or luminaries or guides that I hear people in other philosophies talk about. That they're above. They're not above. They're different than human. They're immortal, but they're not exactly gods in their own rights. Can you sort of explain that a little bit?
So they're often referred to as ange angels. They are seen as similar to Catholic saints, except that they're not only beings in themselves. They were once human beings who have died and gone through the initiation of death and see the world from a different perspective, a heightened perspective perhaps. But they're also archetypal principles as well as forces of nature. So you might see an incredibly powerful luminous tree, and that might be a tree of Grambois, the great forest, the spirit of the great forest. Or Erzulie Freda is love and beauty, and she's also fresh water in the world. Or Ogu is the warrior spirit and leader of men, and also iron in the world and fire. So they're each of them a particular frequency of the life force of God, of Bon Dieu, good God, or Grand Maître, the Grand Master. And they express to us in the world around us. Unlike God, who is extremely distant and abstract, they relate to us because they were once human. And so we can relate to them as well. We experience them as family or friends, but characters that we can recognize and relate to, and we develop relationships with them. And they're in the water that we bathe in and the ground that we walk upon, and they are ancestors that came before us, and the natural world that supports us, and the life force that encourages and inspires us forward.
Yeah, I've read that ancestor worship is the first worship, but I'm not sure if it is or sort of worship of the heavenly bodies are, or if they came together. It doesn't really matter. It was so long ago, but whenever and the first in one place doesn't mean it was the first in another place. It's not like the first 12 people were sitting in one town and saying we're it. It's not like the Atlantis myth. That is just an allegory, probably anyway. But the good news here is you don't have a job anymore. You don't have to remind me of this because Enoch is probably the most famous, of the first who was a man who ascended to not godhood, but to something close to angelic status. So everyone's saying that, Hercules was first or Gilgamesh was first or Jesus. Well, they reached full apotheosis. They ascended to godhood. I think Muhammad probably as well, though I know so little about Islam. That's such a hole in my knowledge base that I'm working on. But that brings us to the Enochian Tarot. Now it makes sense why you've been doing Enochian Tarot. I mean, it makes perfect sense. So let's talk about that for a bit.
So when I was in the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis, I was truly fascinated by Enochian magic. I found it probably...
What is Enochian magic? I'm sorry.
So Enochian is the language that the angels used to speak to Enoch in the Bible. And there was an Elizabethan astronomer for Queen Elizabeth who practiced Enochian magic and received all sorts of documents and sigils and all through scrying. And so Dee and Kelly have these their notebooks, I guess you could say, that have come down to us in time. And angels would point out Enochian letters in the alphabet and explain things and set up sigils and glyphs for these two practitioners of magic. And like most magical systems, there's applications that seem pretty negative, like you could supposedly do this 14-day ritual and destroy the world with it, hurry up the destruction of the world. But there are other astral visions that you can go on and explore the 30 ethers of the universe and in increasingly rarefied circles around the earth, and just fascinating. And I'm a visual artist, so I really loved the visuals associated and what these angels and archangels and sub-archangels would, sub-quadrant angels would show you about their little corner of the universe. And I heard that Gerald Schuler, who wrote a book on Enochian magic, was doing a tarot deck, and they were going to use computer-generated, almost stick figures for the tarot cards. And I somehow made a pitch saying, "Why have a computer do this?" This was long before AI. When you've got an artist who actually does Enochian magic and has seen these things up close and in person, and I somehow talked them into it. So I spent, I think it was just a year, I was pumping out these images for the Enochian Tarot deck. I think I was in a heightened trance state for the entire time. And I was a bartender at the time, so I was going to work with my head full of angels and archangels and sub-quadrant angels and so forth and so on. It was just
still available for
heady time. Pardon?
Is this still available for sale, purchase?
I think it's out of print, and it has been for a long time, but you can still get copies on eBay and so forth.
I don't have to look. Unfortunately, difficulty is something I don't like, but I'll try to look. I guess I'll do a Google search for Enochian Tarot and your name, and it'll show up.
It should, or Gerald Schuler.
Gerald Schuler. Okay. All right. So then I saw Le Marasa, or the Sacred Twins. Well, that is something that repeats pretty much everywhere, including in my somewhat humble opinion, Adam and Eve. So let's talk a little bit about the Sacred Twins.
So the twins, I mean, it also carries into Qabbalah the idea of the two supernals from which everything else evolves. You know, from the union of opposites comes everything. And in Vodou, children who are born twins have special powers, or seem to have special powers, and the child born after a set of twins has special powers. The twins are seen as the first children of God, the Marasa. So they're the first dead, and they're the first ancestors. They're honored at the beginning of a ceremony right after Legba is called upon to open the spirit doors. The Marasa are honored. And again, the idea of opposites that are not in opposition, but which reveal and interpenetrate one another and express through one another and lead to the third principle and everything after that. So there are two bodies who are sharing one soul and express within their own metaphor the idea that there is an invisible world that surrounds and buoys the visible world, and that these two worlds interact and influence one another, and that the visible world influences the invisible world in ways that are visible, and likewise the invisible world influences the visible world in ways that are invisible and might seem supernatural to an observer, but to a Vodou practitioner are completely natural, hypernatural.
You already addressed the Loa and told us about that, but there's something that anything with a number strikes out at me, and you noted that there were 17 Nanshon. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong. Nashon. What is the Nashon, and is there any particular significance to 17, or that's just the way it is?
There's many different takes on how many nations there are. These are the African nations that were brought through the slave trade to Saint-Domingue and developed in different percentages in different parts of the island for different kinds of work. So these nations are actually recognizable, you know, Igbo, Rada, Arada, Congo, Nago. These are nations that you would actually have found in Africa at the time. Yeah.
12, got it.
And some people say 17, some say 41, some say 21. You know, it just depends. They're generally categorized as either Rada or Petro. The Rada being the more gentle, more formal, more religious, older African spirits and rites. And the Petro are seen as more, they're speedier, they're faster, they're hotter, they're more magical in nature, more informal in nature, and maybe more turbulent than some of the Rada ones. And it would be a mistake to see those as either good or bad. They just are what they are. And one of the things that I think is so healthy about Vodou and the Vodou worldview is that rather than trying to rout out any aspects of our psyche that might be turbulent or intense, the idea is you just bring them into balance, that all of it is powerful and all of it is divine. All of it is an expression of God's life force. But you just want to bring it into balance within yourself.
So there was sort of that, you know, all of the like initiate, if I am understanding the book correctly, OUNSI is sort of like the initiate. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah, NC. Yeah.
And then you advance to a level of Ongan.
You go to the level of NC. I'm sorry, of Ungan or Manbo Serpuen, which means on the point of, which is kind of an apprentice priest or priestess. And ultimately you get to the level of Ungan or Manbo Asogwe, which is the highest level of initiation in full priesthood.
Yeah. I want to throw something out there real quickly, just so, because I don't want to get into too much other guests to talk about, but, a lot of people think possession is something horrible. And of course we see that in, lots of horror movies and stuff like that. But possession in voodoo you're not being possessed by something evil. It's sort of almost like the ecstasy of communing with something divine. It's and that's why there's a lot of physicality in the dance and the moves. Which I think is probably sort of the tie into yoga and the chakras.
For me, it is, and that I don't sacrifice animals. I use life force or prana and breathing and all of that to allow possession to happen. It's also something that the drummers, which they have incredibly complex drum patterns, and there might be 3 or 5 drummers all drumming at a different time than one another. And it's all being held together with this bell. And they do what's called casse, which is a break against the dominant rhythm that allows possession trance to happen. And of course, I don't experience possession trance as a routing out of myself or a shortening of myself. Rather, it's a raising yourself into a higher presence, into a greater being. And it's experienced as, it's certainly strange and challenging, but it is experienced as a blessing.
Your book has excellent charts or illustrations, one showing the different chakras and the sort of, I guess, the associated parts that are tied to voodoo with them, and also the Kabbalistic tree of life. And I don't know, for whatever reason, those just struck me. I don't know if it's even possible to sort of go over the Kabbalistic tree of life in brief.
3 minutes or less.
Right.
It's a glyph that represents how life issues out of nothingness, out of the negative veils of being, and how light comes through from that. And each of the different spheres has a meaning and a realm of experience that is represented within that sphere. It's also a way of organizing tarot, and the court cards are each of the primary cards are each within a pathway that connects the spheres and so forth, and the elemental cards fit in the spheres. So it's a way of finding a universal order behind tarot cards and behind experience.
For those listeners who have been longtime listeners who just stumbled upon the show on Chinese magic, this book is a little bit similar to Jason Reed's book on that, in that it actually gives you sort of direction step by step on how to do some of the chants, or at least how you do them. So obviously I don't want to go through all of them. That's buy the book so that you can do that. But one, when it resonated with me, and I'm going to pronounce it, I think it's couché, and it seemed almost like Vision Quest, Walkabout, Odin hanging from the tree, Jesus in the desert. I mean, it sort of seemed a little bit like that. And, I'm sure I'm oversimplifying things. Can you talk a little bit about it and actually pronounce it correctly?
Couché means to put to sleep. Okay. And it refers to a week-long initiation process that's pretty intense. And some of that intensity comes from being isolated from the general contemporary world and being in an isolated chamber. I can tell you only a few things about it, having taken oaths before spirit not to spill the beans, so to say. But you spend that week on your left side, dreaming or visioning or doing whatever you do for a week on your left side, and punctuated by some pretty intense rituals that occur. And for me, the experience was one of stripping away everything that I used to identify myself, emotionally, psychologically, socially, spiritually, even physically. And I went through a dark night of the soul while I was there, when I was saying to myself, what are you doing here? You're the shabbiest excuse for an initiate ever. Who do you think you are? And what do you think you're doing? And I was just ripping myself to shreds. And Edgar, my papa, came in the room, or so I thought. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or having a vision or imagining or what was going on, or if he was actually really there. And we talked for hours, which was pretty strange because he spoke only Haitian Creole. And at the time, I spoke French and English, but no Creole. And we understood each other perfectly. At the end of that conversation, I was able to say, okay, this is me. This is what I've got. These are my strengths and my weaknesses. And do with me what you can. Let me be of use. Let me serve. And that allowed me to take up my power and accept myself and put whatever skills and weaknesses I have to work. And the night after the initiation was over, Edgar showed up at my friend's house. And I told him that I'd had this experience and asked him if he was actually there. Did I imagine it? And he said, oh, I was there, all right. And he repeated the conversation that we had. And he was speaking Creole and I was speaking French and English. And we understood each other perfectly. Yeah. And it was very weird.
That is very weird. Is on the left side, is that a metaphor or is that literal?
You're literally sleeping on your left side. And
how do you stay? How do you, like, are you in a structure where
you would wake up and be on your back or whatever and turn over?
Okay. So it's nothing like you're in like a box or something where
no.
That's fine. All right. I was just curious. I guess, most people are sort of active sleepers. Okay. So talking about not spilling the beans, you have a section here on secret societies. So, we all want to hear about secret societies. So what can you spill the beans on secret societies and voodoo?
Yeah. So there's fairly well known publicly that there are secret societies in Haiti. The Masons would be an example of secret societies elsewhere. And, in Haiti, there's not always, a structured police force. There's not always a government that you can rely upon to mete out justice. So these secret societies, in addition to claiming anyway that they have powers of shape-shifting, that they can become animal forms, that they do magic stuff, voltigeurs that bounce around in balls of light and travel through physical space and balls of light, but they also are a kind of community regulating vehicle. So if somebody has done terrible things, then these secret societies can convene and form a kind of tribunal to determine whether the person is guilty or not and what should be their punishment. A lot of these secret societies work with powders and potions that allow them to actually zombify a person and the whole, exploited, sensationalized zombie image. I never actually met a zombie in Haiti, but some of these secret societies can supposedly administer these powders and potions that slow a person's metabolism down to the extent that they will seem dead, and they actually bury them and put them underground for a period of time. And when they revitalize them, there might be some brain damage, but there's also a great deal of trauma. And the person's punishment is to be a zombie for life, which in a culture that was founded upon slavery, that's a pretty horrific fate. Yeah. To be trapped in a body with no soul, laboring for somebody else.
Absolutely. Oh, somebody woke up. What are the holiest or most special times in voodoo? New Orleans is famous for Carnival, Mardi Gras, Jazz Fest, I suppose, which is probably, completely secular. Always, Halloween and, All Saints, or Day of the Dead afterwards. Which are actually part of voodoo or which are part where, people just get together to have fun or, whatever. Yeah.
Well, my house is pretty unique in that we do ceremony every week, which would not happen pretty much in Haiti. But there are certain dates on the calendar that are extremely important. In New Orleans, St. John's Eve on June 23rd is a particularly significant magical time at midsummer. And we do head washings, they're called, which are kind of voodoo baptism on Bayou St. John, and it's open to the public, and hundreds of people come to participate in that very beautiful ceremony. You mentioned Halloween and the Day of the Dead. November 1st is the beginning of Fête Gede, the festival, the party for Gede, who are the spirits of death and sex and regeneration. And we do a major, major event at our New Orleans Healing Center in the lobby for Fête Gede. And again, hundreds of people come out for it. And for our house, the third Saturday in July, we do a hurricane turning ceremony because New Orleans is so threatened by hurricanes. Juneteenth is a very important date in American Vodou because it's the date of liberation of and end of slavery. We do Christmas Eve. There are bonfires in Lutcher, Louisiana that we go to, and bonfires and flaming baths are practiced on Christmas Eve, and we serve all the petrol, all the fiery magical spirits, and make magical stuff and do these flaming baths. It's a great deal of fun. And Easter today, all the Rada spirits, all the gentle, formal spirits have been sleeping through Lent. And so at the end of Lent, we feed them all and wake them up and celebrate them.
That's great. I think in the past, people have told me that one of the most famous images of people of a certain age from the United States, Asogwe Americans, our first introduction to voodoo, besides being Scooby-Doo, was probably the James Bond movie Live and Let Die.
Oh God.
Right. So, and we had was Papa Legba with the top hat and the skeleton? Is that correct?
They got their images a little crossed. Legba got crossed up with Gede. So That's a terrible movie. And looking at it more recently, it's an incredibly racist movie. It's really kind of appalling. And the disrespect to Vodou is extreme. And I think about how, Vodou was carried on the backs of people who were enslaved. And are we still going to really exploit these people and make a buck off of them, off of their suffering, and let them line our pockets? It's truly appalling. And I hope that anybody who has seen that movie erases that from their minds and approaches Vodou from a fresh perspective. And for those who haven't seen it, maybe don't watch that ede. Don't give it the time of day.
Both of these movies, so it's probably pretty easy to avoid.
Yeah.
What is the difference between Gede and Legbo? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing either correctly.
Legba is an old man. He's a Mason, and he's dressed in Masonic clothing. He is quite benign. He's the opener of doors and pathways. He accompanies human beings pretty closely in our walk of life. So he is a little battered and beat up. He's lame. He walks with a cane or a crutch. He's very relatable to us. He's like our Papa Legba. And
he's sort of like Odin when he's nice. When he's wandering, when he's not being awful. When Odin's being nice, it sounds like Odin.
And Legba is associated with the sun. And Gede are all the spirits of the dead. And they're the rulers of the family of the dead. Some of them are considered to be young and virile. Others are corpse-like themselves. There is Baron Lacroix, the Baron of the Crossroads, and Baron Calfou, Baron Samedi, the Baron of Saturday Night. But Kalfu is seen as the bottom of the crossroads, while Legba is the top of the crossroads. Legba is an old, lame man. Kalfu is a virile, young, handsome black man. And he is the moon. He's the nighttime. Legba is the sun in the daytime. But they both have something to do with that crossroads between life and death.
Is there any crossbar? Is there anyone at the other two cardinal points?
There's life itself. There's our physical world, the earth, the universe that we walk in is the horizontal arm. The vertical arm of the crossroads is the invisible. And where the two intersect is where magic can happen. And
you had noted that the double V is a symbol of voodoo, and that, in fact, is crossroads. And I guess if also you want to sort of shove them a little bit together, it's sort of the Star of David.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. And, of course, anybody who read the Da Vinci Code, you know all about what he offered on that as well. All right. Now, going back to ugly Americans of a lowbrow sort, like me, because I'm talking directly about me, maybe one of your first introductions into voodoo was the professional wrestler named Papa Shango, who later on went by other names. Now you understand why you're seeing all these strange things behind me, because, this is an audio podcast, but behind me are some luchador masks and a stuffed doll that looks like it might be a voodoo doll, but it's not. It's a doll of Lily, who's Alexa Bliss's sort of evil avatar. It's all pro wrestling. So there was a wrestler named Papa Shango, and, of course, he was casting spells on people and things like that. So who is the real Shango, and why is he nothing like the bad guy professional wrestler, Papa Shango?
I don't know that he's nothing like him.
Okay.
Shango is actually an Orisha. And just to be clear, I'm a Manbo of Haitian Vodou, which deals with Loa, not Orisha. So anything I say about the Orisha is suspect, and I'm certainly not an authority. But Shango is the spirit of thunder. He's a drummer. He's a dancer. He's masculine beauty. He was a king. And so a very good leader, including leader of ourselves, the capacity to make good decisions and to take a path and follow through it with confidence. And he likes fire. He likes to play with fire. But he is very masculine and very beautiful and powerful. So I guess the wrestler has something to do with some of that.
Yeah, but probably also was a bit of the live and let die confusion, because the symbology was much like, not like Babel, but Gede, I think you said, Gede. More like that, but top hat, face paint.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a fun little character, short-lived, probably for the best. Anyway, I noticed that there were, I don't want to say different ranks, but there seemed to be Unjans and Lapas, and there was another name, Munjan, and they seem to be associated with different skills or rights, or can you embellish on that a little bit?
I think it's more levels of knowledge. That an Unsi is an initiate. Unsi Kanzo is an initiate who's gone through a kind of trial by fire and is seen as someone who has made the decision to marry themselves to a life of the spirit and to serve. But they're certainly not expected to know a tremendous amount about ceremonies and how to carry them out, or even to have deep knowledge of medicinal things, magical things, how to cross the no man's land into spirit possession. They're not necessarily expected to be able to help guide other people, and be a resource for other people. They're there to serve. And the Serpuen, the on the point of, are definitely apprentices. They have a great deal more knowledge, but are still learning and practicing. And at the level of Ungan or Manbo Asogwe, I would say you're always and for the rest of your life learning, that you don't ever get to the end of everything there is to know, which I find very refreshing. But you have a good deal of knowledge that you're able to impart to a community. I think the measure of a Manbo or Ungan is whether people find that person to be effective and helpful and a good guide in the paths of life.
I can't believe I didn't ask this earlier, but how is it that you were able to find a way to study Qabbalah and Masonry? It sounds like you studied Qabbalah before you found Voodoo. So, I mean, it's not like something you can just say, I want to study Qabbalah. And and there wasn't an internet then where you could just Google it and maybe find. So how did that happen, especially in Maine?
Well, I wasn't always in Maine. I ended up in Connecticut and then New York City and traveled. I was quite a vagabond for a while, but it's in my family. I had an uncle who was a Kabbalist. I have a cousin who's a teacher of Qabbalah, and there are books, and you can work with them. It is like so many things. It's a practice, and it's not something that I would say at any point that I'm a master Kabbalist or an authority on Qabbalah. I just practice it. I work with it and find it enhancing of my life. It deepens my experience of my life.
Right. What about the Freemasonry?
Well, my involvement with the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis, they make a claim that they were a development of the Knights Templar who went underground into Masonry, and that they contain the knowledge and the magic of Masonry. So that's my inroad there. I'm not an actual card-carrying Mason.
Right. Yeah. I can't tell you how many people I run into who tell me that they're, a Freemason of such and such level, but they can't tell you anything because they're sworn to, which seems to be a very convenient way for people pretend that they're something that they're not. Especially when they're telling you that on the internet. But anyway, I know that you have ceremonies coming up rather shortly today, so I want to be respectful of your time. So my last question is going to be very open-ended, which is, what didn't I ask you that I should have, or what did you feel important to tell me about that I didn't give you a chance to?
There's a whole world of information. I've literally been studying Vodou for decades now and practicing for decades, and I am nowhere near having a sense that I know much of anything. And it is one of those things that the more I learn, the more there is to learn. And
well, that was Plato's definition of wisdom.
Okay, well, that makes me very wise indeed. But I encourage people to, if you're traveling in New Orleans and you're there on a Saturday night, which is when we usually do our ceremonies, I encourage people to attend, just sort of take the plunge, because I could sit here explaining voodoo for the rest of my life and not give you a good sense of what it is. It's experiential, and the drumming is amazing, and the Creole songs, the sacred songs of Vodou are amazing. The dancing is amazing, and the experience is a profound one that not only changes any erroneous opinions that you may have picked up about Vodou, but it changes your perspective on your own experience, your own life, in a very healthy, empowering way. So I encourage people to come and experience the real thing, or go to Haiti if you can and experience it there. Just don't expect most practitioners to simply open their doors and be happy to see you. They're cautious.
Right. Makes sense. Okay. So how would people, obviously there's a book, there's other things. How can people follow, support you? How can they find their way to the ceremonies? Where's your shop located?
My shop is the Island of Salvation Botanica, and we're all over social media, and we have a website so people can find us through any of those means. We're in the New Orleans Healing Center, which is a project that my husband and I put together with the help of lots of people. and it's on St. Claude Avenue in New Orleans, Louisiana. And you can certainly find the shop at Island of Salvation Botanica.com.
Okay, wonderful. And the book is Vodou Visions. I think I got it off of Amazon, so that's probably
you can get it from Amazon.
But probably in some bookstores too as well.
Mm-hmm. And there's the New Orleans Voodoo Tarot, which is a way to get some hands-on experience with the Loa.
Is that an actual deck?
Yeah.
Maybe that'll be my plan B if I can't find the Enochian one.
Destiny, Inner Traditions.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing time, especially on Easter today. I know it's a big deal for you. I appreciate that. And folks, please check out her stuff and buy the book if you have any interest. And if you go down, if you're in New Orleans, say hello. And I'd ask that you give us a rating, a review, 5 stars. If you can write a review, that's wonderful. But more importantly than anything else, well, 2 things co-equally. 1, subscribe so that you can download and never miss any episodes of both Garden of Doom and Garden Views. And refer friends, because this is sort of a genre-defined show, and I'm not really sure that the name of the show accurately depicts all of its content. So anyway, with that, thank you very much. Thank you again, Sallie Ann Glassman. Appreciate your story with us and your knowledge. Wonderful. And have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
We'll hear you next week in the Garden of Doom.